Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Freedom Project stream. Today we have with us Miss Shara Ruffin. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's a qualified clinical social worker. She's a certified social worker in healthcare, and she's also a board certified telemental health provider. She's currently in Philadelphia. And good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Freedom Project stream. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Uh, you're most welcome, and thank you for coming on our stream and helping us understand what it takes to become a mental health professional in uh,
Mhm.
in their own right, right? Yes. So if you don't mind me asking, so how's the weather in Philly currently?
It's a little cooler today, but it's like mid 60s, I want to say. Yeah.
Oh,
But still
oh,
good.
yes,
It's comfortable. So,
yes.
how is it where you are?
So currently it's the monsoon here. We have four different seasons, and then it's the monsoon, so it's a bit more on the verge of raining. But yeah,
Okay.
so since you're a social clinical worker and you help social workers pass their bachelor's and their master's to attain a clinical license in
Hmm.
record time, right? That's what is on your LinkedIn profile. So my next, should we jump right into questions,
Yeah,
into
that's
these
fine.
questions? Yeah. So can you tell us about the bachelor's degree required for becoming a mental health professional?
Okay. So maybe I should probably back up and start with, well, maybe telling everybody what I actually do, because there's a lot of titles after my name, and most people who are not in the mental health field or not a social worker, they wouldn't even know. So again, I'm Shara. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Philadelphia. I am also a former therapist. I have been a social worker for about 17 years. I just got my license after 10 years, postgraduate master's degree from Howard University. I graduated in 2010. I hold a bachelor's in social work, and again, I hold a master's in social work, a license in clinical social work, which means I can practice independently without supervision. I also have a certification as a board certified telemental health provider, which means I can provide telemental health as a provider virtually. I can also teach other people how to build telemental health practices. So it recognizes me on a national level for being able to be competent in telemental health, which is very important right now because we're still in the midst of a pandemic. I also have 10 specializations. I specialize in trauma, military counseling, grief counseling, mindfulness meditation, as well as a whole bunch of other things. Right now, I'm not a practicing clinician. I'm actually an entrepreneur. So my business is called Journey to Licensure, which I think that's how you found me on LinkedIn. And that business was born 6 months ago. Out of my own struggle of taking 10 years to get licensed. Now, the LCSW takes 2 years. It took me a decade because of life circumstances as well as postgraduate work. So I found that once I got my LC, my one post that I put up, it's in the feature section of my LinkedIn profile of how long it took me to get licensed. It hit about 93,000 views. It's actually still in the feature section of my LinkedIn profile. When I realized how many people are actually struggling with getting licensed, I thought I could help. So I started doing free sessions on a social media platform called Clubhouse. When I started doing that every week for about 6 months, it became a very popular study group. I literally had people passing their exams just from that group alone. And very recently, 2 weeks ago, I got my business featured in Business Insider, as well as now making my business an official LLC. So I help social workers at every level, bachelor's, master's, clinical, get their pass their licensing exams, and then after that, help them with their career projection. So that's mentorship, supervision, those types of things. So it's been going pretty well. But to answer your question, so each mental health provider, whether they are licensed clinical social worker, LPC, which is licensed professional counselor, or if they're a psychologist, PsyD. Everyone goes through a different process for their educational background and their licensure. So I can only speak to being a social worker because that is my profession by training and by my license. So I'll start
Okay.
with the Bachelor of Social Worker. So it takes about 4 years to get your in the U.S. To get your Bachelor's of Social Worker degree. Of course, you make it a major. So a lot of your classes are around basic knowledge of social work, human behavior, research methods, different areas of social work, but it's very generalized knowledge at the bachelor level. In some states in the United States, once you graduate with your bachelor's, some social work jobs require a bachelor level license to
Okay.
practice as a social worker. Now, that's not every state. For example, for me, when I graduated with my bachelor of social work degree, and that was 2008, I believe, I did not have to get a bachelor level license. A lot of states now are requiring bachelor level social workers to get a license. Why? Because they feel that it's relevant to be competent. The license is not so much for the practitioner, it's more so to protect the public. So if there's something
Okay.
that ethically goes wrong, that professional, it has to uphold their standards. They are now liable for taking care of their clients. So it's a
Yes.
regulatory thing regarding the
Yes.
board at the bachelor level. Then once you are finished with the bachelor level, you have a choice whether to pursue a master of social work degree. Now, it is most likely that a lot of social workers do pursue their MSW degree. Why? Because there's more job opportunities. There is the master's degree in social work is really, in terms of career projection, in terms of money, is really where you want to go. So
Yes.
I decided my senior year that I was going to go back to school right away because I knew with a Bachelor of Social Work degree, I wasn't going to have much mobility in my career at the time. So for some people, they wait to go back to school. I didn't. I jumped from my bachelor degree program within months to my master's degree program. So
Okay.
when I applied for graduate school, I applied for three different schools: University of Pennsylvania, Temple University, and Howard University School of Social Work. Um, Howard University is a highly prestigious historically Black college in Washington, D.C. Temple University is in Philadelphia. University of Pennsylvania is an Ivy League school that's also in Philadelphia. I got accepted to all three, but I decided to go to Howard University because I was living there at the time. I was actually living in Maryland. That was 2009. So the program that I entered was called Advanced Standing. So when you decide to go for a Master of Social Work degree, you have about three different choices. If you have a bachelor's in social work, you're eligible to get your Master's of Social Work degree within a year to 2 years, full time. So for me, for instance, I already had a Bachelor of Social Work. So I was eligible to get my master's within a year and a half, which was advanced standing. Advanced standing program is for social workers that already have a very strong background in social work, their foundation, which is their bachelor's, so they can fast track out to get their master's quicker, usually about a year to a year and a half, which was me. I did a year and a half, 3 semesters, graduated 2010. I was 24 at the time. I'm 35 now. And then once you get your master's degree, you get licensed at the master level, and that's also for salary purposes. A lot of jobs now require the master level licensure. And
Yes.
then after your master level licensure, the requirement is that you do 3,000 hours, 2 years under a supervisor that has a license in clinical social work,
Yes.
to be supervised for that time. And then you're able to qualify to sit for your LCSW, which is your licensed clinical social worker license, your advanced generalist license, or there's some states they call it LICSW, which is licensed independent social worker. I know in some states they call it that, but it means the same thing. So
Okay.
nonetheless, so those are the requirements basically. Typically, depending on someone's life circumstance, what's going on, if they have children, if they're older, everyone takes a different time frame to go through those different stages. Me, pretty quickly from my bachelor's to my master's, 4.5, 5 years tops. 4 years of bachelor's, about a year and a half to my master's. I took about a year or so off before I pursued my master level licensure degree. License. And then it took me almost 9 years before I got to the LCSW, just because life kicked in. I got married, had kids, and also was building my career as I went along.
Yes. Oh,
Does
thank
that
you.
help in terms
I
of
feel
me?
yes, yes, yes. That
Okay.
does answer. So, like you said, people sometimes. So basically, what I knew about social work, I thought, I didn't know it was such a lengthy process to, actually get licensed and be able to do social work, right?
Mhm.
And social work in like different areas of society and different parts of the world, it depends from person to person of what social work is like a picture in their mind. So how would you classify social work, like an overview?
So there's the the way I look at it, social work is a helping profession. It's very different from, we work from a strengths perspective when it comes to helping people, which is different than psychologists or other disciplines that are similar. Social work is all about helping underserved communities, marginalized communities. We're kind of told that we're the backbone of society. So if that, to kind of keep it very simple, that's the way I look at social work.
Okay. Yes. So yeah, backbone of society, I think, does put it into perspective for everyone that is unknown uh, or relatively has inadequate knowledge about it. Yes,
Mhm.
thank you. Uh, so my next trend is towards mental health, like you said. You're different, so you do different work basically than what psychologists and psychiatrists do, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
currently in the conversational trends towards mental health, right? What do you like? What are the relevant current conversation trends in mental health that you tackle or you feel are currently being tackled?
So currently, the pandemic we're in, and I face some of my own mental health challenges myself. Um, Mental health, when we think about it, let's start back. I want to generalize this. I talk a lot on LinkedIn about my own mental health, because it's heavily stigmatized. I grew up
Yes.
in a community, I'm African American, so in my community, it's heavily stigmatized to talk about mental illness. I have generalized anxiety disorder, a learning disorder, as well as ADHD combined type. I'm also someone that was a therapist, so I also treated people that had similar disorders. Also, one of the most heavily stigmatized, schizophrenia, right? Psychosis, psychotic disorders that for most people in the public, it's hard to understand. Most people kind of shame away from it. So when I think of mental health in general, we all have that. As long as you're living and breathing, no matter your culture, no matter your background, no matter where you come from, we all have mental health. Mental health affects how we think, how we behave, how we feel, right? So
Yeah.
when I tell people, mental health is important, it's not just important, it's one aspect. What the interesting thing is in society is that we'll go to the doctor, right, if we have a cold, but when it
Yeah.
comes to our mental health, we're less likely to want to go see someone for that. And that's where the stigma comes in, depending on your culture, your background, where you are in the world. So
Yes.
when I think of, there's a distinction between mental health and mental illness, and I want to make that distinction for the general public. Mental health is something that we all have, but when it comes to mental illness, that is an official diagnosis where someone isn't able to function normally and they need support, structure, medication. So a good would be generalized anxiety disorder, which I have, ADHD, which is schizophrenia. Usually someone that's diagnosed by a licensed psychiatrist or other licensed mental health professional. They usually need support to function normally or at their baseline. So that's the difference. There's mental illness and then there's mental health. So that's the distinction I always want to make for people. Excuse me. But right now, I think because we're in the pandemic, we're about what, a year in. I know it's calming down in some areas of the world, some areas it's not, where they're lax in vaccinations, and then there's the variant Delta variant going on. So, I mean,
Yes.
uh, the pandemic really has brought up another pandemic itself. We have mental health, right? People being
Yes.
isolated in the beginning, people dying, family loved ones. So you're dealing with multitudes of different facets of the pandemic in relation to mental health, especially when it comes to the lack of connection. Our life has generally changed because of it in terms of how we connect to people, which
Yes.
without connection, that's what makes us human, right? But that's also the one
Yes.
thing that cripples our mental health in general. Does that help?
Yes. Yes. That
Okay.
definitely does. So yeah, rightly, like you said, the pandemic is currently in full swing. Not full swing as of yet. Everything is it's shutting down. It's opening up. It's in a very you know abrupt situation. Sometimes there is a different variant, or there is who says that it continuously uh, keeps changing, right? It keeps
Hmm.
mutating, and don't know when. We can't have that uh, we can't know the place and timing that we get this virus. So we stay at home, and then when we stay at home, we don't have that physical touch or the contact that we used to have generally before the pandemic, right? And
Hmm.
that has affected mental health across the world.
Yeah.
People who had access to mobile phones, who had access to the internet, they could at least connect to their loved one. But
Hmm.
people who didn't have all of that, and it was a very difficult time. Yes, that is true, and it's still going on, right?
Yes.
So currently, like in the US, it's currently opening up, and the pandemic is a bit on the reduced side because most of the people have been taking the vaccine. And
Yes. But the other side, if I could introduce the other side of that, there are people that still will not take off a mask, that still are getting secondary trauma from the pandemic. I have children, so when they go back to school, two girls and one boy. So when they go back to school, I'm worried about, are they going to get sick? Even though right now,
yes,
scientifically, we know that that population is less likely to get sick. It's that so far they're letting vaccinations be approved for 12 to 18 because that population
yes,
now is getting sicker. And they're getting
yes,
that's the population in dense that we know is getting affected. If we got to look at in terms of communities, minorities less likely are wanting to get the vaccine because they don't trust it. There's also a historical when it comes to African Americans trusting the medical system. There's a historical reference to why that is.
yes,
Um, but that is the population that's most been affected by this pandemic in the U.S. that I can speak to. Um, yeah,
yes,
so yeah, I wanted to interject there because now they're if even we have vaccines, I think it's going to be literally years. People are going to be talking about this for a long time. We haven't had a
yes,
pandemic since the Spanish flu in the U.S. That was 100 years ago,
yes,
and so we're going to be dealing with the repercussions of this on a lot of different levels, mental health for a very, very long time.
yes. Um, like there are implications that are going to show for next few years, right? And you did
Mhm.
mention a few. Um, could you elaborate on some of those mental health implications that will go on for the next few years, or like what will be a very major topic that will require social work and mental health professionals to work in
Well,
their
right now,
capacity?
I can speak to, I'm not in private practice right now, but one of the reasons why I wanted to get certified in telemental health is because a lot of my colleagues were being thrown into doing telemental health without being properly trained. There are a lot of protocols and competencies that you have to do telemental health. And there are a lot of people in the US that are not able to get services come in especially elderly community, people that live in rural areas that don't live in an urban city. So there's a lot of implications for that. Telemental health is not heavily regulated uh, in most
Yes.
states just yet. There's no universal state regulations. Each state handles telemental health very differently. And I knew when I wanted to pursue, excuse me, wanted to pursue a board certification, I wanted to make sure that it was one that would one recognize me nationally for my contributions to that field, but also because I knew that telemental health teletherapy was going to be booming because of the pandemic,
Yes.
and people are not going to be either willing or able to come in. And we have the technology that we can have accessibility to services. So that's definitely one trend I have to say. Is I don't think telemental health is definitely here to stay. It's not going anywhere. Just like telemedicine for doctors isn't going anywhere.
Yes, that's true. Because of the pandemic, right? You mentioned the reasons why we can't go to mental health professionals,
Mhm.
and so does this also, affect the stigma that that was there before? Firstly, in marginalized communities or small communities, but
Mm.
also if you think of gender, and you feel women are more likely to talk about mental health than men are,
Very
right?
true. Yes.
And
Yeah.
depending on the family and the circumstances.
And the
So
culture.
is this,
Yes.
yes, is this like a blessing in disguise wherein telemental health, can help people to get access to a counselor or to a therapist better?
I do, but I also think there's gaps because if you're elderly, the technology is different. So there's challenges around, marginalized communities that there's elderly. Do they have access to internet? Do they to not just internet, quality internet to get that type of connection? Just like we can see each other clearly, we have quality internet, but that also comes with finances. You have the finances to do that.
Yes.
This is where I think there's a big gap in services still, especially when it comes to marginalized communities that historically are very poor, don't have access to certain things that they should have. So this is where you start to see the gaps in services still, and you're going to still see that. I don't think that's going to go away anywhere until there's a recognition that there needs to be that gap in services needs to be closed. And how are we going to do that at the policy level? There's programs, or there needs to be things implemented to make sure that there's the finances are there for people to be getting the services that they need when it comes to mental health grants. Things on a federal national level that needs to be put in place for those gaps to close, especially for the communities that are most affected and heavily stigmatized. And especially right now with the pandemic, that's minorities, that community. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because yeah, and no society is equal, and
Hmm.
no one has equal access to information or help for the matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are various ways, but then immediately we can't get to that point where everyone has access to such internet or various factors, right? And mental health has taken a various turn. Before, it wasn't spoken about as well, and it's currently being spoken out, but not in the wavelength or the factor that we would like to reach, right? Currently, because of the pandemic, it's gained prominence, or it's come to the forefront of people's minds that mental health is an aspect that everyone has to take into account, or uh, take into account and keep at the back of their mind, or keep it in their consciousness. So depending on this, how uh, how long do you think will it take for everyone to talk about mental health, or at least be aware, not get
I think we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go, right? I still feel like there's a lot that with the technology that we have, with the knowledge that we have now, I think we've made progress for people to want to be open to talk about it more. But I think that's also more of the generational gaps, right? I'm 35, so my generation is more likely to talk about mental health now than the generation behind me, which would be my parents, right? They were born in the
Yeah.
60s. So I think it has to be a community effort to continue to destigmatize it, right? I talk about it on LinkedIn all the time. I started out that way, talking about my mental health as a provider, because I felt that people needed to see that people that have a strong educational background, that's in the field. Um, Sorry, my eyes are, I think it's the light, but um, we struggle too. We're human.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that, ooh, I really got something in my eye. Sorry.
Yeah, no, no, take it.
um, it's one of those things where I wanted to destigmatize it by using myself as a vehicle for that. And people were really thankful that I constantly would talk about my struggles that I've had personally, that you probably wouldn't even think, looking at a shiny profile with a bunch of accolades. It's important for people to see that people like me, or people with similar pedigrees, we all have something that we struggle with, you know?
Yes, that's true. That's true. And you spoke about your mental health, and you like you said, you write it on your profile. You share it to the
Mhm.
world, basically.
Mhm.
And so, like that, everybody should face up, or first accept that there is something, or if there's nothing, but still there is mental wellness, wherein you eat food every day, and keep your body healthy, you exercise. So like that, there are tips or practices that you can use
No,
to stay
yeah.
mentally well.
I tell people that, mental health, the mind and body, they go hand in hand. You can't have one that without the other, right? You can
Yes.
take care of your body, but then if your mind is not right, what's the point? Some people have excellent physiques, but their mind is a mess. So I think they have to go hand in hand, which is why for me, even when I tutor, I'm coaching, I take a very holistic approach to tutoring. It's not just tutoring, it's how are you taking care of yourself during the study process? Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Do you meditate? What type of ways do you deal with stress? How do you manage stress? I look at all those things because there's a part of me that's still a clinician, even though I'm not practicing it at this time.
Yes.
So I think when we have to start taking a holistic approach and stop separating, the mind and the body, and even the spiritual part, which for some people is very important. You can't separate them; they're all in one body. So why not treat them the same?
Yes, that is true. uh, and like you said, you have a few activities. Then again, it comes back to how you treat yourself, how you treat your body, the same way you should treat your mind, right? There are
Mm,
certain foods, and then there are certain exercises, there are certain things that you can keep everything in check. uh,
yes.
so again, so then I think now we are nearing the end of our live session. So the last question, like I would
Mhm.
ask you is, what would you like to share with our audiences today before we go? Any message or anything that you would like to share?
In regards to mental health, I would say you have to, you talked about it a little bit earlier. It has to start with you acknowledging and accepting that it's okay to be, to struggle. You're not the only one. Sometimes when we're going through things, I feel like we're like, oh my God, we're the only ones going through it, and we get stuck in this bubble. Um, and then when we start talking about it and opening up, is then when you realize I'm not by myself. Which I think, if you ever heard of Clubhouse, that social app pretty much blew up
Yes.
during the pandemic in January, because people could talk openly and know that they weren't by themselves, which was a great app during the time around the world where people were feeling disconnected. But yeah, I would definitely say to those out there listening, you're not by yourselves. No matter where you are, technology is there to reach out to somebody to talk to. Sometimes, even if you don't want to go to a counselor right away, the first part is acknowledging, seeking support, finding someone that's going to, give you that support. If you don't have it, there are plenty of resources out there to find it. So that's what I pretty much have.
uh, yes, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today, and thank you for educating us in the various topics of mental health and social work. uh, Thank you so much. I
You're
would like to
welcome.
thank the audiences again for coming out and uh, watching the Freedom Project live stream. uh, Thank you, Miss Sarah. And if you
You're
like this
welcome.
video, please like the video below, share it with your friends. Anyone who is a counselor or trying to become a counselor, they can reach out to Miss Sarah, and she'll give you more information, or she can give you coaching or the right direction to look into for your professional career. And you also might have learned basic stuff of the pandemic and how we talk about mental health, right? Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good weekend. Have a joyous Sunday. Stay safe. Wear a mask if you go out and sanitize. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.